For the afternoon on Trip 3, we go up Oracle to Catalina State Park, one of the gems of the Arizona state parks. A Hohokam village, mesquite everywhere, good camping, nature trails, geology hikes, dark skies for stargazing, and a hot spot for owling, that is, looking and listening for owls in early evening. If you've not yet been, please go. Very cool patch, too. Among the many birds visible at Catalina State Park is this one, the beautiful vermilion flycatcher. The male is strikingly red, easily obvious in the field. The female is less obvious. There's no red, but just some orange tinging on the sides. This is called sexual dimorphism, and it's another bit of evidence of evolution, like what was identified in plants and animals on Trip 2. Not to be totally dispassionate, but the male side of reproduction is vastly abundant and therefore not precious. To attract mates, males must be, well, attractive. The female side of reproduction is less abundant and therefore precious. Females need not be attractive, and they get to choose their mates. Here's a male vermilion photographed on a past SOP trip. They really are this obvious and this easy to photograph.
The Hohokam village at Catalina State Park is called Romero Ruin. Here's an oblique aerial view of Romero. The trail circles around part of the site, with Sutherland Wash at the bottom. The elevational change from wash bed to village is at least 30 feet. No real threat of flooding homes here, but once again, easy access to water, firewood, and farms and gardens. Brilliant community planning, no? Indeed, archaeologists have confirmed that Romero Ruin was occupied for almost 1,000 years. They were obviously doing something right.
Looking more closely at this community planning, here is a map and longitudinal profile of Romero Ruin. The red line is a transect across the elevational change from the Sutherland Wash up to the Hohokam village. The plot on top shows the elevational change on the y-axis in feet. Down at the bottom is Sutherland Wash, mostly flowing during Hohokam times, including occasional flooding. Corn was probably planted near the stream to take advantage of flood irrigation. Meanwhile, houses, community centers, and the ball courts were at least 30 feet elevated above the floodplain, clearly out of harm's way from flooding. Nice. Another paleo example of human society managing its water needs and flooding risk in a reasonable manner.
Romero Ruin has a couple ball courts, a form of community infrastructure. Here's an artistic depiction of a Hohokam ball court in use. That's a mountain and Tuamac Hill on the horizon. This ball court is accurately depicted in size and shape, with some pit houses with side door entry as well as open-air ramadas off to the side. The foreground is considerably altered from the native desert of the background, perhaps depicting that even small communities leave a mark on environments depending on how long lots of people stay in one place.
Notice also that strip of trees extending left to right just in front of the mountains. That's the riparian zone of the Santa Cruz River, probably composed of mesquites with cottonwood and willows mixed in, and undoubtedly visited by lots of wildlife. It would have been an easy to walk to this riparian zone to hunt, gather water, or tend to crops, but the infrastructure of this community was safely out of harm's way from flooding.
Here's one of the ball courts at Romero Ruin, big enough to hold class for a team photo.
Not only did Hohokam communities live agreeably with urban washes, they also looked upslope and saw opportunity. Whereas we might look at this scene, an alluvial fan coming down from the mountains, and see next to nothing, Hohokam saw multiple environmental zones to be exploited in different ways.
For example, in the zone down by the washes and Main Valley Stream, in this case the Santa Cruz River, floodplain farming was practiced while homes and other expensive infrastructure were built elsewhere.
Meanwhile, in middle slopes, within eyesight of the riparian zone, but up in elevation, drought-hardy agave was cultivated and roasted, a totally different ag utilization than down lower in the Piedmont.
Similarly, up a little bit higher, at the intersection of the fan deposits and the bedrock mountains, small-scale terrace farming took place, allowing for even more variety in ag production. In this example of environmental zonation, the Hohokam employed diversification of subsistence, such as irrigated maize farming, dryland agave farming, foraging for wild plants, and hunting game. And this helped to minimize the risk of succumbing to extreme climatic events like flood and/or drought. If a flood took out crops in Sutherland Wash, the Hohokam could rely on floodwater farming on the tributary washes, as well as agave and other native plants and animal resources. This ability to anticipate extreme events and spread risk across the landscape undoubtedly helped the Hohokam to survive and thrive for 1,000 years. How does this compare with how we today prepare for unexpected events like pandemics? What might we learn from the Hohokam?
This, by the way, is what that environmental zonation looks like at Romero. This is looking upslope from the village site. Yeah, what do you think? Inhospitable wasteland? Or multiple opportunity here?
At some point in your time at the U of A, you have to go to Catalina State Park and the Romero Ruin just to see this magnificent saguaro. This one is unusually giant, with something like 50 plus arms or armlets. Always a big hit on SOPTrip3.
Our last stop on Trip 3 is a tranquil mesquite bosque. Bosque, a Spanish word for forest. Mesquite is common in the Sonoran Desert, although we didn't see it much, if at all, on Trip 2. It's a dominant tree species in Catalina State Park. A pleasant tree by appearance, it doesn't grow in single straight stems like other trees, but rather it puts out multiple crooked stems, so no long straight 2x4s from this tree. But everything else about this mesquite is perfect. Great wood for other uses, edible fruit, insect-friendly, shade in the summer. The leaves are small, well adapted to this arid environment, just like what we saw on Trip 2. Flowers are also tiny, but profoundly abundant, grouped into inflorescences of about 100 flowers each. Flowers that are successfully pollinated yield an edible fruit in the form of a bean pod.
Wood from mesquite is prized for fine carvings and furniture, as well as for firewood, especially for cooking. I wouldn't mind having one of these chairs in my house. Nice.
The renowned American conservationist Aldo Leopold, himself a master of sense-of-place field trips, once spent a couple weeks canoeing the delta of the Colorado River, back when the river still reached its delta. He cooked his meals over mesquite coals, and he said this about that. We had cooked with white oak in the Corn Belt. We had smudged our pots with pine in the North Woods. We had browned venison ribs over Arizona juniper. But we had not seen perfection until we roasted a young goose with mesquite. Perfection.
The seed pod of mesquite can be ground into meal that can then be added to just about anything. For example, add mesquite meal to whatever baking mix you prefer at a 50-50 ratio, plus eggs and milk, and you have excellent mesquite pancakes, which is the desert treat for Trip 3. Mesquite cakes taste, well, mesquite-y, unlike any other taste, really.
Because it's a product of a legume, the kind of plant that fixes nitrogen, as discussed on Trip 2, mesquite meal fortifies food with protein, a good idea for personal health and growth.
As with prickly pear of Trip 2, when you realize you can eat mesquite and then look around and see it everywhere, you suddenly feel like you have a chance at surviving in this landscape because of such food items being so abundant, if not nearly infinite.
Not sure if there's enough mesquite out there to supply beans sustainably? Let's do some classic SOP back-of-the-envelope math, like we've done before on other field trips. The counties of southeastern Arizona comprise about 16,000 square miles. Famously, there are 640 acres per square mile. So that rounds off to about 10 million acres, or 10 to the 7 acres. Remember, for back of the envelope, it's okay to work with just the exponents. An acre is about the size of a football field, so let's go with 10 trees growing at something like Arizona Stadium, making it 10 to the 8 trees. And maybe each tree has 100 inflorescences and 100 flowers per inflorescence, making it now 10 to the 12 flowers every year.
Wow, that's 1 trillion flowers.
Right, there's probably not enough bees to pollinate that many flowers, so let's go with 1 in 1,000 flowers getting pollinated, and therefore making fruit. That would be 1 billion mesquite pods every year, faithfully, rain or drought. A lot of pancakes. Mesquite is so popular amongst tree aficionados and desert rats that poetry has been written about it. Sitting within the bosque at Catalina State Park, we read this one entitled, "The Old Mesquites Ain't Out." Bear with me now on this one because there are 3 stanzas. We see some signs of returning spring, the redbuds back and the fieldlarks sing. The ground's plowed up and the creeks run clear, the onions sprout and the rosebuds near. And yet there's a point worth thinking about, the old mesquites ain't out. The fancier trees are in full bloom, the grass is green and the willows boom, the colts kick up and the calves bend down, and the springs apparently come to town. And yet there's a point worth thinking about, the old mesquites ain't out. Well, it may be spring for all we know, there ain't no ice and there ain't no snow. It looks like spring and it smells so too, the calendar says it's plenty true. And yet there's a point worth thinking about, the old mesquites ain't out. Groovy, huh?
That's nice.
Well, it isn't Robert Frost, but still, a poem dedicated to mesquite, that's pretty unusual for trees.
Now, for the record, on the SOP trip that day, the Rito indeed had surface water flowing. Clear this time because it was snowmelt, but the mesquites of Catalina State Park were not yet out. That is, they had no new leaves yet. So there you have it. Sense of Place Trip 3, sort of, done in video format. We still need something from you for grading purposes, so see our revised assignment on D2L.
From Trip 3, the course patch has the Santa Cruz, Rito, and Cañada del Oro rivers on it, plus the continuity equation, as well as a pit house and a mesquite tree. You all still qualify for one of these patches if you wish. Once we're allowed to meet again in person, feel free to stop by my office for a patch.
Trip 4 next month will also be done virtually, so stay tuned for that one. Best wishes in your other classes now in this new normal of online only. We'll be back next month with a video for Trip 4.
See you, everybody.